Hi, it's Martin from Martin's Engine Services. Here is part two of the strip down of the very exploded and very poorly Ford 2-litre Duratec HE engine from the Fiesta ST150. I did start making this video sort of live as I was stripping the engine, but I've actually managed to somehow lose the footage. I didn't lose too much, so I've stripped it all down and I thought, right, I'll lay it all out and give you a little explanation of what's happened and show you some of the carnage. Starting with the block, first of all, you can see that most impressive hole in the side there, and the carnage where the conrod and the piston and all the other bits went bouncing around inside and made a bid for freedom. A few good chunks at the bottom of the cylinder liner there. If we just flip it over, you can see how nicely the hole is in the front of the block there when the air conditioning pump goes. The air conditioning pump goes the other side of that, which hid that. There's a fairly lovely crack here, running up there and through here, and quite some impressive hits in this area here. Dented it in there and punched a hole right through to the oil return gallery. There's no significant damage into cylinder 2, all the debris stayed well contained in there considering. One item in the block that did take some most impressive hits and broke in style is the poor old oil pump. Now, here is the poor old oil pump. I'll just get him orientated in his right direction. He bolts onto the block like this. Now, when I removed the sump, it was quite apparent straight away that the oil pump was actually tipped about 1 millimetre out of line towards the flange of the block. I already seen the damage where this part of this bolt washer broke off, but when I started to unbolt the oil pump, not only did I discover that the casting's actually cracked here, and obviously the hits and everything there, but the retaining bolts are all bent, and I've kept the most impressive one of all, which is this one. Now, the thread and the head of the bolt are actually still lined up, but wow, just look at the dent, and that was running through there. Strange enough, it actually undid quite well, so it was quite surprising. The oil pump does have two retaining or location dowels here, both of which are shattered. There's a few bits of that one still in there, but that one had just exploded into bits. So that did for the oil pump. The dent in the side here has actually crushed the pump's body and has actually trapped the rotor. The rotor hadn't broken, but I had to actually beat the rotor out and the outer part of the pump to get it all apart. So that is pretty impressive. The cover was okay, but that is quite a hit. And there's the part that come off the side of it. So that's definitely the end of the poor old engine block. Now the main bearings section here, or grid plate or girdle plate, whatever you want to call it, stayed intact considering. Took some impressive hits, but would have thought this would actually have chopped it off here, but no, survived rather well. I know that Fords do say that this cannot be removed from this type of engine because it does something to the alignment of the block or the bearings, but I've taken quite a few of these out and put them back, and they do not seem to be a problem. I just don't understand what the issue is. I've built several of these and they've always been fine, my own one included, and that's done quite a bit of track day work and we've had no problems. The one thing you have to be aware of is that the main bearings have no location tags at all, so you've got to make sure you sit them central into the housing. You can do this just by visually inspecting it. Once you've got them down in there, what I like to do is turn this upside down on the milling machine table, which is absolutely flat, and gently tap the other side of the casing down just to make sure they're fully seated. This has never been a problem in the past. I can only speak as I find, but that's the way I put them together. I've actually found the torque setting for these, and someone's actually, I don't know where they got it from, but I've actually found that, and they are not very tight. I was quite surprised. I think it's only something like about 45 Newton meters or something in that region, and if you tighten them any more, they will lock the mains up. So you've got to be very careful. I don't mean exact figure now, but I know it's not as tight as you think. So that's just something to be aware of. But I'd say it works okay. Now over here we have conrod from cylinder 2. The bearings were still in it, but spun. And you can see they've actually been hammered out, so they are considerably wider than the reasonable bearing from further back in the engine. They've stayed together quite well considering, but you can see the heat they've taken and the general punishment. Likewise, the conrod has been absolutely toasted and is completely charred black. And of course this rod now is scrap because it will have ovaled the housing and probably bent the rod. The other two pistons and rods that came out of cylinders 3 and 4, the conrods have had no overheating, pistons are fine. I did quickly measure the housings and they seem perfect. There's actually no problem with those and they're perfectly usable. And that was about the worst of the bearings that came out of those cylinders. So they do slight signs of oil starvation, but no real issues. So there's something there survived. Likewise, the piston out of cylinder 2 has got some scoring on the skirt, on the thrust pad. Tiny bits of debris gone up it, but the rings are fine. There's no sign of any other damage. Gudgeon pin was fine, little end was good, so not that I'd use that, but if the piston has survived. Now, put the valves to one side for a moment because it's a whole new story. Let's come on to the poor old cylinder number 1. Well, there is the piston and what's left of the rod. There is the rest of the piston with a few bits of blocking in there as well. And that's what's left of the bottom of the conrod. Found one very mangled cap bolt, 2/3 of a cap, and we're missing that section of the rod. So we're missing about yay much of the rod. You can actually see how impressive the damage is to this, and amazing enough the gudgeon pin has stayed in the piston. The piston is split across the top quite comprehensively, and if I get it in the right angle you actually see how bent the top of the piston is where it's hit the combustion chamber so hard. The end of the rod here has actually got a nice curve in it and is hammered out very nice and smooth. And I'll show you in a little while, but that actually corresponds with a dent in the crankshaft. Presumably this was pounding around when the bearing left home, and it just got so hot and the fatigue took over, it's literally just torn it off. I think the oil control ring may not function too well. Remarkably, the other two rings, there's a little bit broken out, but nothing much. And the top piston rings actually survived somehow, which is quite remarkable. I guess the rest of this conrod and the rest of the block, say, is probably bouncing along somewhere at the side of a racetrack and is now landing in the weeds for prosperity. So that's pretty much the carnage of the bottom end that we've got on the bench here. Now moving on to the crankshaft. This also has had quite a traumatic experience, as you can imagine. I've got it set up in the lathe here because I just want to show you something interesting. Here's big end journal number 2. It's absolutely cooked. It's actually dragged the iron over the surface and actually built it up. Now number 1 big end, just see in there, that there is actually the dent, which is the shape of the end of the conrod. You can actually see like the 2 lines and the section through the middle of the rod, the H section. I mean, it's beaten the oil hole half closed and has absolutely crucified it. Now, when I put this tortoise apart, none of the main bearings had actually spun, but what actually happened, if I can get it out of the lathe, was that I did notice that the bearing shells on main bearing journal 1 had actually worked their way or walked in and were up against the crank here, and likewise, keep hold of the thing, likewise number 2 had done the same. Now what I think has actually happened is the shear load and heat here has actually pinched the crank, and I'll show you it's actually how bent it is in a moment. And what's actually basically happened there is that so the heat has actually forced it, say, to bow, And you can see the heat transfer that's come through the nose of the crank here by the way it's gone black, and it should be the same colour as the journal here. Now the crank is actually definitely bent, because when I run it in the moment, if you eyeball the main here to the bed and the same here and look at this nose, you'll actually see it is actually swinging out. And moving around to the front, you can actually see the oscillation here and the fact that this is moving and how far out this is. And that is very comprehensively bent. The journals themselves have actually survived so well that they're almost perfect. There's no grooves in them, there's no marks, there's hardly anything. Likewise, the two remaining big end journals, they've got some very, very slight marks on which we'll polish out, but it's a little bit of a hot spot there. But considering all odds, they have survived remarkably well. But boy, oh boy, now you can really see that dent in the crank. That takes some doing to put a dent in the crankshaft like that. I mean, it's a fairly robust old crankshaft. I mean, it's very much reminiscent of an old Ford Pinto unit, actually. I guess Fords make things pretty much the same. But this is going in the scrap bin, but I will be recycling the end section here. This is what I use for fitting flywheels and starter motors to my stationary engines. I chop this off here, chop through there and there, machine that round, bore it out, and then put it over the end of the crank. And that's what I'll be using that flywheel for. That's absolutely had it for anything else. That can be recycled for some for that little job. Now, moving on to the sump. You can just get right around. You can see the poor old sump has had some very impressive hits and took a lot of pounding, because this sits obviously very high to the crank. Now, the oil pickup pipe here, which is full of bits of bearing and all the other bits of shrapnel. This is where I think the Achilles heel of the lubrication system of these engines is. The pickup pipe sits in here, so the end of it sits down in this well. As you can see, the end of the pipe is very, very small. And because there's no actual well in the sump as such, if the oil level's low, the oil goes up here and up here under G-force and cornering and starves the oil pickup. See, this part of the sump here is obviously cut out for the air conditioning pump on the Focuses and Mondeos and stuff, but on the ST nothing goes there. Also, there's this large section of the sump at the back here which is just hollow, which doesn't do anything either, which is strange design. And of course what seems to happen is when they burn a bit of oil and they get low, you get oil is fine and when it's in a normal place, but obviously when the oil sloshing around and whatnot, you get the oil pump starts to pick up air, so you get cavitation in the oil pump and air bubbles in the oil, and this is what does for the bearings. And this is what happened to my ST engine and a friend of mine's and a couple of others I've done. It's the same problem every time, and if you catch it in time, it may just pick up the big ends and you can get away with just replacing the shells and making sure it's clean. But if you don't, this is kind of what the net result is. I mean, you see by all the shrapnel in here and the debris exactly how bad things are. Now, on the subject of shrapnel and debris, there's a very cheap oil filter fitted to this engine, which I'm going to give 10 out of 10 for being incredible, because I cut the filter open and this is what was in it. I mean, this is just ground up bearing, shrapnel and everything that went up the oil pickup. The filter is totally rammed full of it. However, there was none of this at all in any of the bearings or any of the journals or anywhere in the cylinder head or anything. None of the rest of the oil system had any of this in it. So this filter had actually caught, I would think, about 95%, maybe more, of all that debris. And there's signs of it having been through the pump, of course, which is inevitable. But that's quite impressive, because given the fact that the bearings are basically melted and the rest of it, I mean, you can see that the screen inside here is absolutely packed. So that's quite worth noting. That was. I was quite impressed by that. It didn't appear at first that there was much metal in the oil till I cut the filter open and all that fell out, so I thought, wow. Now the poor old cylinder head has also suffered a fairly spectacular fate. The exhaust valves, although not apparently that badly bent, have actually dented the head. You see the aluminium's actually bent over and almost touching the valve seat, and here's what it's supposed to look like. I believe there is a crack here, potentially a crack under there, so you've basically got a lip. Not so much on this one, but you've got quite a heavy lip there, and of course it's right next to the sealing area of the head gasket. The intakes, which look quite bad, hadn't actually dented as much as you thought, but it has split the valve guides. I'm not surprised by this because the inlet valves had actually bent themselves in this area here. I mean, just look at that. Tap that straight, that'll be fine. So the exhausts hadn't gone as far as you actually would have thought given the punishment, but they're all bent pretty much the same angle. I think that sums it up nicely. A bit of art, a bit of wall art coming up there. So that's pretty much done for the head. I mean, these engines aren't exactly hard to find. The 2 litres are all pretty common. You can fit them into most applications, whether it's an ST or a standard car. It's not really worth going for the hassle. I mean, you could clean this off, but there's always a question of a crack in there, and I mean, it can't have done a hell of a lot of good to the valve seat area. I mean, that could loosen the seat off. Obviously, it needs 2 new guides, possibly 2 in there, although they don't appear to have. No, it doesn't appear to have cracked the exhaust ones. No, the exhaust ones look to be okay. By the time you spent money doing that probably facing it, it's just not worth it. I think this is going to be like all the other parts of this, destined for the scrap pile and turned into a bit of cash later in the year. In fact, I think the only really serviceable parts left is we've got 2 good pistons and rods, which I will keep just for the hell of it, a few nuts and bolts, a few cam followers, and I think the best bit about the whole engine, it's the only thing that survived as a whole set of, is those 4 spark plugs. I think it's about the only thing any good. So that basically is the carnage of the poor engine. Oh, I did actually have a look at the camshafts the other day in more detail, and the journals on them are quite badly worn, although I don't think that was caused this time. I just think there was a bit of general wear. So that's basically what happens to your Ford Duratec engine if you're absolutely flat out when you get an oil starvation problem or an oil pickup problem, and everything decides to go a little bit wrong. Big end melts, con rod decides to break up, gets out the front and the back of the block, smashes everything to bits, launches the piston up into the head, smashes the valves into the head, killing that, and generally makes a spectacular mess of everything. Definitely is the most impressive one, especially that oil pump. I did think that was quite spectacular when I took that off. The only other thing I did find on here that was actually broken, but I don't think it was related to the blow up, was actually where the water pump bolts into the block. There's 3 little lugs, and this lug here was actually snapped off. It looked like it'd been off for a while, but I couldn't be sure. I can't honestly believe that the impact in this area in the block here would be enough to flex it to break that. So possibly it was a replacement pump, so I guess maybe someone had tightened the bolts ever broke it. But that was the only other thing that was a bit curious, but there's no way I can see that's flexed that badly. Otherwise everything seemed okay, and there was no evidence of anything horrible having happened to it in the past. So we shall never know exactly, but there you go. Well, I hope you've enjoyed part 2 of this little adventure into the world of exploding engines. I mean, something's gone up the road at speed. Hopefully I'll get something else interesting to take apart soon, because it's always quite interesting taking this sort of thing apart and investigating and finding out what happened. So please like and subscribe. Viewing numbers are looking good. I really want to try and get my subscriber numbers up now. So if anybody you know just let them know. Don't mind if they just subscribe and never watch it. Just want to get the subscribes up. So again, thank you very much indeed for watching, and so I do hope you enjoy this video, and bye for now.